dice, muy buenos días. Thank you. Gracias. Les agradezco. Gracias. Y buenos días. Y gracias por recibirnos aquí en su comunidad para su amenaza a esta administración de President Trump. En sus números, en su corazón, en la manera en que quiere tratar a la gente que vive aquí, independientemente de su género, de su raza, de su fe, de los números de generaciones que tienen aquí adentro de este país, o si llegaron ayer. En este momento todos somos americanos primero que cada otra cosa, que no importa. Vamos a hacer que es necesario para esta generación y el futuro de este país. El liderazgo que necesitamos, que merecemos, está aquí adentro de este cuarto hoy. Gracias, gracias por todo. Es un honor, es un placer y vamos a hacer todo lo que podemos con esta oportunidad. I feel at home here in San Diego. It is only a 10.5-hour drive from El Paso, which you know in Texas terms is right around the corner, right? In fact, when we were growing up, my dad, Beto O'Rourke, would put us all in the car and drive us due west to San Diego for our vacation. And what was supposed to take 10.5 hours, I don't know if he did it in 8 or 9, but it was land speed record kind of driving. And his method was he would tuck up behind an 18-wheeler and draft behind that 18-wheeler and see how close he could get and freak the shit out of all of us who were in the car. You'd be taking a nap and you'd wake up and there's an 18-wheeler in your face, but no accidents, knock on wood, so far. Going back today to El Paso, this time we will not be driving. We're going to be flying via Alaska Air to get back home and see my kiddos, Ulysses, who's 12, Molly, who's 10, Henry, who is 8 years old. We've been on the road for the last 6 or 7 days, get a chance to come back home and to see them and to address some crises that we've got in our house. Our baby turtle Gus went missing last night, and it does not look good. We followed the trail of turtle food out the living room, through the kitchen, the dog door into the backyard, and we think Artemis, our 3-year-old dog, must have gotten into Gus and taken Gus out. And I was on the phone trying to console Molly, our 10-year-old, Gus's mom, last night, and she had on speakerphone with my wife Amy, and I said, Molly, it's gonna be okay. Either we're gonna find Gus is gonna show up alive, or we're gonna get another turtle. And Amy, is like, no, we're not gonna get another turtle. We don't need any more pets in this house. And then that started Molly crying again. And then I was like, sorry guys, I gotta go. And which makes the point about how hard this is, right? For families to step up and to serve. How hard it is, especially for Amy, who bears the brunt of the parenting responsibilities, everything that she's doing in her life, the job that she holds down, what she's trying to contribute to our community and to our country. But I know that here in San Diego, you are no stranger to service and serve in far more profound capacities than we know in our household. Those of you who have deployed or who have family members who have deployed or are deployed right now, halfway around the world, putting their lives on the line for this country. Our hats are off to you for what you do. Those military retirees who call San Diego home, who proudly have served this country, we are grateful to you. And that is something that has distinguished this community, much the same way it has in El Paso, Texas, my hometown, home to Fort Bliss, the 1st Armored Division, 32,000 active duty service members, more than 70,000 veterans. In our larger community. Thank you, and thank you for your service. And what I've learned from you is that those of you who have served, whether in uniform or you were the family member of someone who served in uniform, that service never stops. I was just having breakfast this morning with Howard and Jean Summers, whose son deployed to Iraq, fought for this country, came back with post-traumatic stress disorder, came back with questions that he could not answer about our involvement in that country, the war that we fought, the things that we asked him to do, came back unable to access the care that he needed, including the mental health care that could have saved his life. And as 20 veterans a day do every single day in this country, he took his life, could not take it anymore. But distinguishing their service beyond the sacrifice in their son is the fact that Howard and Jean Summers take every single opportunity to meet with a presidential candidate or a member of Congress or a member of the United States Senate, and it does not matter to them what party, Republican or Democrat, what position of public trust or power. They're going to make sure that they do everything that they can to help other families who are dealing with these tragedies or to prevent them from happening going forward. I've learned that from working with your members of Congress in the 6 years that I served on the House Veterans Affairs Committee, taking the inspiration from the Summers family and expanding mental health care access for all veterans, including those who came back with other than honorable discharges, getting that signed into law by President Trump, someone with whom we agree on almost nothing, but we can find the common ground to save the lives of those who put their very lives on the line for this country. We have a lot in common in our two communities. Both border communities that understand that we don't have to just tolerate one another or respect our differences, but we embrace them, and it makes us stronger. We are safe cities. San Diego and El Paso, Texas. We are both safer than the average American city deeper into the interior. Safe not despite the fact that we are cities of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees from the world over. Safe because we are cities of immigrants and asylum seekers and refugees the world over. And we've learned to treat one another with the dignity and respect that we are owed as human beings and certainly as Americans under our Constitution. And that is what has made us safer. Not walls, not putting kids in cages, not sending 5,500 members of the United States military to a border at one of its safest moments in the history of the U.S.-Mexico border. Si queremos asegurar nuestras comunidades, necesitamos tratar cada persona con respeto y dignidad. Así podemos hacerlo. We do not need to fear one another. We do not need to hate one another. We don't need to buy in or be complicit in the racism coming from the highest positions of trust and power right now. We, los fronterizos of San Diego and El Paso, this is the best time for us to be where we are, not just to call out a president who described Mexican immigrants as rapists and criminals, though they commit crimes at a lower rate than those born in this country. Not only the moment to call him out when he calls asylum seekers an infestation or animals, which is what I would expect somebody in the Third Reich to do when they're describing a fellow human being, because an infestation is the way that you would describe a cockroach, something that you want to kill to keep from coming in and harming your country or your family. That is not the way I would describe a 3-year-old boy who just showed up in a cornfield outside of Brownsville, Texas, solo, with a phone number written on his shoe, abandoned by the coyote who had brought him there in the first place. The mother who entrusted that child into the hands of that smuggler did what she had to do given the circumstances and the conditions in which she lives in Honduras or Guatemala or El Salvador, 3 of the deadliest places on the face of the planet today. If the only way to save the life of our 8-year-old son, Henry, was to send him on a 2,000-mile journey, you can believe that's what Amy and I would do. And we want them to go to a place like ours, comprised of people the planet over, whose very success is premised on the basis that, unlike most other nations in world history, we're not defined by race or ethnicity. We're defined by an ideal that we are all created equal, to equal opportunity, to serve the greater good of this country and of the world. And when we turn our back on that, or those kids in cages, or those families who've been separated that still have not been reunited, not only must we live with the condemnation of our conscience and the future generations who will follow us, who will know full well what we did in this democracy, where the government is the people and the people are the government. But the very genius of our success will be lost to us for those generations going forward. So not only must we never again take another child from another parent, not only must we reunite all of those families who have already been separated, we must use this as an opportunity to rewrite this country's immigration laws in our own image, to reflect the reality here in San Diego, in El Paso, in Storm Lake, Iowa, in every community that I've been to in the United States of America. Start by freeing every single one of those dreamers from any fear of deportation. Make them U.S. citizens here in their true home country, where they are every bit as American as anybody else. Don't do it at the price of their parents, the original dreamers. Bring them out of the shadows as well. And millions more who pose no threat to this country, pay far more in than they ever take out, are raising their kids, are investing in our economic success. Allow them to contribute to their full potential. Comprehensive immigration reform, not written by Democrats, not written by Republicans, written by Americans in the best interest of this and every future generation. Are you with me on this, San Diego? We should be able to do this, and we should be taking the lead. We are also with you. We are also with you following the horrific tragedy that we all learned about this weekend. The shooting at Chabad of Poway. The lives forever changed. The lives lost. Lori Kay, who I understand from reading Rabbi Goldstein's comments, literally saved his life by sacrificing hers. One of the outstanding veterans from this community, who was also worshiping, Oscar Stewart, who sought to intervene, ran towards, not away from the gunfire, perhaps saving other lives in the process. Jonathan Morales, an off-duty Border Patrol agent who puts his life on the line every day to protect this community and this country, not knowing what threat he will face tomorrow. He's off duty, and then he's there to try to protect that community, this community, our country. So not only do those heroes deserve our praise and our thanks, not always must we forever commemorate their memory and their actions. Not only must we send our thoughts and our prayers, we must also back that up with our actions. We must stand up against the hatred that we see in this country right now. A president who has described the Ku Klux Klan, white supremacists, and neo-Nazis as very fine people. A Congress that is complicit in the bloodshed that we see in this country. More than 30,000 of our fellow Americans will lose their lives this year in synagogues, in churches, in mosques, in concerts, in schools. Our first grader coming home from school last spring tells us about the active shooter drill that his teacher took him and his classmates through. She's got enough on her plate, teaching him to read, to count, helping that child who has free and reduced breakfast and lunch but does not have a meal to look forward to when she goes home, and out of her own pocket, though she's not paid enough to make ends meet in her own household, is there for that kid. Now she's got to think about putting her life in between those children for whom she's already sacrificed so much, and an active shooter, because we fail to take action. For what reason? I don't know, except the next election, or those polls, or the NRA, or the Political Action Committee. Do not fear that stuff. We are not a fearful people. We are bold. We are courageous. We will do the right thing when we have the chance, and you are forcing that to happen right now. The Congress, about 7 weeks ago, passed universal background checks, at least the House of Representatives. That's in large part thanks to your activism, your advocacy. Those high school students who led the marches for our lives that we participated in here in San Diego and back in El Paso, Texas. Those of you who demand that we no longer sell AR-15s or weapons of war into our communities, leave them on the battlefield where they belong, because they were designed expressly to kill people effectively, efficiently, in as great a number as possible, and that's exactly what they do. And then let us not forget those whose lives were claimed not in a school, not in a synagogue, not in a public place, in a sensational murder that makes the front pages, but those children and the people in our community whose lives are claimed one or two at a time in communities all over this country, so numbingly common it doesn't even make the front page or the headlines. Their names are not even said on the nightly news. So communities of color, lower income communities where this is all too frequent an occurrence, they must be lifted up as well, and we must do this for them as well. We must allow no fear, no political consequence, no poll to dissuade us from the action that we need to take. Just before we came out, I got to meet with some extraordinary healthcare workers from SEIU. Thank you for the work that you all do if you're still here. Talk about a challenge before us. Tens of millions of our fellow Americans cannot see a doctor, cannot afford their prescriptions. We have one of the largest providers in the country of mental health care services being the county jail system in this country. We have people in the year 2019, 97 years after insulin was invented and sold to the Canadian government for $3 Canadian, dying of diabetes, crowdfunding their insulin treatment, rationing their care, succumbing to something that nobody in 2019 in the wealthiest, most powerful country should ever have to worry about. So the goal has to be guaranteed, high-quality, universal health care. That means that everybody sees a primary care provider, affords their medications. Everybody can see a psychiatrist or a psychologist, a therapist or a social worker that can mean the difference between life and death. And then in a country that has a crisis in maternal mortality, 3 times as deadly for women of color, in states like mine where we've closed down so many family planning clinics, not only can a woman not get legal access to an abortion, she cannot get a cervical cancer screening, family planning help, or in a state that didn't expand Medicaid, any medical help at all. So universal health care also has to mean that every woman makes her own decisions about her own body and has access to the care to be able to do that. We should be leading on that as well. SEIU will also remind me that one job should be enough for every single one of us. Those school teachers I talked about, in Texas, working 2 and 3 jobs just to make ends meet. And those public school educators, the cafeteria workers, the support staff, the counselors, the librarians, doing exactly the same when they have the most important job I can think of right in front of them, unlocking that lifelong love of learning within every child. Once we do, that kid is unstoppable, this country unbeatable. Why do so many Americans work so many jobs just to try to make ends meet? This economy works really well for a very few number of Americans. It does not work well enough or at all for millions more. So what do? We make sure that not only do we have a political democracy where every vote counts, and we can count on every one of us standing up, we have an economic democracy where we have a minimum wage that is a living wage. $15 an hour is not just the fight, it must be the victory that we win and celebrate. Paid family leave so that you can take care of yourself or your kids or your folks and still be able to make an income and not lose your job. And then parity for the work that women do when they're paid 80 cents on the dollar for the same work, the same number of hours, the same value that men are providing. 61 cents on the dollar for women of color, 53 cents for Latinas in this country. We need to make sure that we end discrimination in the workplace based on any difference, whether that's sexual orientation or gender. We need to ratify the Equal Rights Amendment so that there is no basis in the Constitution for discrimination. And then we've got to make sure that as the power of unions and their enrollment has declined year after year for the last 30 years, compromising the overall economic success of this country, leaving so many people out of the skills, the trades, the purpose, the function that they need in their life. We have to make sure that we no longer allow them to be weakened, but we strengthen unions and make sure that everyone has the right to organize, to participate, to use the value of their work to leverage for higher wages, better working conditions, and a better economy for all of us. And lastly, the mother of all challenges before us, climate change. 1 degree Celsius just since 1980. That's how much this planet has warmed. Not because of God, not because of Mother Nature, but because of you and because of me. Our excesses, our emissions, our inaction in the face of the facts and the science and the truth, that is what has caused the wildfires that we have seen in California at an unprecedented level. 58 inches of rain that fell from the sky in Houston, Texas, the landfall record for a single storm for as long as we've been keeping records in North America. The third 500-year flood in just 5 years in Southeast Texas. Folks had not finished rebuilding their homes and their businesses from the last one before the next one hit. The places that we call home, El Paso, Texas, in the desert Southwest, Charleston, South Carolina, any city along the coast or the ocean will no longer sustain human life going forward along this current trajectory because we are on course to warm not another degree, not another 2 degrees, but 3 or 4 degrees at least. And the competition for resources, the deaths, the property damage, the migration patterns that we're seeing now, when people have to leave Honduras and Guatemala and El Salvador because what they are planting is not growing in the face of historic droughts, all of this will become exponentially worse for our kids and the generations that follow unless we act now. Those same scientists tell us we have 10 years within which to marshal the greatest mechanism that humankind has ever devised to call forth the genius and the power of a people, and that is our democracy. And if we match that with a conscientious capitalism, if we ensure that we transition off of fossil fuels to renewable energy, like wind and solar, if we help farmers to be able to do more by planting cover crops that pull carbon out of the air and disturb less of it in the soil, if we invest in the resiliency of our communities, especially lower income communities and communities of color that have borne the brunt of climate change so far, if we invest in the innovation and the technologies that will allow us to meet this challenge, if all of us do everything we can in the decade left to us, we can also take our rightful role as the indispensable nation on the global stage, convene the powers of the planet, and allow them to do what would otherwise be impossible. But we cannot do this by half measure. We cannot do this with only half the country. At this very divided, highly polarized, and hyper-partisan moment, we must not see each other as Republicans or Democrats or independents, big cities versus small towns. None of the differences right now can further divide us. Instead, we must be known by our ambitions, our aspirations, the work, the service, the sacrifice that we will employ in order to achieve them. That is why I am here. That is why you are here. That is why we are going to win this race. And I will serve you as the next president of the United States of America to make sure that we follow through on this potential and our promise. Thank you, San Diego, for having us out. Very grateful. Thank you. Thank you very much. I'm going to make sure that we have some time to listen to your questions, take your comments, your ideas, your suggestions. Cynthia Cano right here has got a microphone. If you get her attention, she will do her best to bring it to you.
Okay, this is going to be our first question. Just say your name. I'm Lada.
Hi. Write this down because I know I'd be nervous. What do you say to voters concerned about reestablishing our global position as a world leader and repairing relationships with democratic allies who may be nervous about your lack of foreign policy experience?
This is a great question and a great opportunity for this country. You think about where we are internationally today. Our 18th year of war in Afghanistan, our 28th year of war in Iraq. I was a high school senior in 1991 when George H.W. Bush first announced U.S. military involvement in that country. And we have been there every single year since through 6 successive presidential administrations. Those 2 wars alone have added trillions of dollars to our national debt, our deficit spending, and claimed the lives of thousands of our fellow Americans. And we've had to take the lives of tens of thousands of our fellow human beings in the name of this country with no definition of victory, no commonly understood strategy, or any awareness of the ultimate cost or price that we will pay. No end in sight in these wars, only we are also in Syria tonight, in Yemen, in Somalia, in Libya. We need to bring these wars to an end and bring these service members back home to this country. We need to work with other countries on this planet to solve our challenges peacefully without firing a shot. You look at how we stopped Iran from obtaining a nuclear weapon. We didn't invade yet another Middle Eastern country, start another war, send more U.S. service members overseas to lose their lives. Diplomatically, with the permanent members of the Security Council, Germany, and Iran, we negotiated a peaceful resolution to a very dangerous problem. It wasn't perfect, it didn't settle every score that we needed to, but it was sure better than the alternative. You look at this other challenge. We have a president right now who has gotten as close as he can to every dictator and strongman and authoritarian government on the face of the planet. Vladimir Putin, who attacked us and our democracy in 2016, sought to undermine the genius of this country. And on that stage in Helsinki, Finland, in 2017, you had the President of the United States of America defending Vladimir Putin instead of our intelligence community, our country, and our democracy, because we know that the Russians tried again in 2018 and will try again in 2020 until there are consequences. But it's not just Putin, it's Duterte in the Philippines, it's al-Sisi in Egypt, it's Erdogan in Turkey, it's MBS in Saudi Arabia, which is bombing the hell out of Yemen right now, creating the worst humanitarian crisis on the face of the planet. And we are a co-combatant and complicit in the bloodshed and the war and the indiscriminate bombing that is taking place right now. And while all this is happening, we have turned our backs on Mexico, Canada, the countries of the Western Hemisphere who we are connected to literally by land and family and culture and language and history. We've turned our back on NATO, on the European Union, on our traditional allies and the democracies, not just of the Western world, but of the planet. This is our chance to get this right and to get this back, to renew those alliances and friendships that were so often forged in sacrifice, going 80 years back to the last existential threat that this planet faced of Nazi Germany, at least to our Western democracies. We won that war through extraordinary sacrifice, and the peace that we purchased, that those young men and women purchased, can be squandered in only one administration if we do not get it back over the next. And then lastly, how in the world do thousands of kids show up at our front door on the Texas-Mexico border, and it is a surprise to us after they've traveled 2,000 miles? How in the world can the president not only cage those kids, deport their moms from where they fled in the first place to save that child's life, but now threaten to cut off $500 million in funding, which is all that we invest in the Northern Triangle countries of Central America? And if you want to put it in perspective, his wall is $30 billion. Not only should we not cut that funding, we should double it, invest it in violence prevention in the Northern Triangle, help those families to stay where they are so that they do not have to flee. Let's reprioritize the Americas, the Western Hemisphere, and make sure that we do the right thing while we still can. Thank you for the question.
Okay, I'm up on the stage.
Hello, Berto. My name is April Mahoney, and I'm a podcaster on The Edge with April Mahoney. And I have a question. How do you feel about a female running mate? There's a lot of women that are positioning themselves. There are a lot of women of influence. There's a lot of women that can raise money. But we want to make sure that that's the right person and that we're not carrying the same isms just because we're changing the gender, sexism, classism, racism? What's your position on that?
You asked me how I feel about it. I feel really good about it. I want to make sure that the next administration, and if I am so fortunate through your support to head that next administration, looks like this country. The genius of this country in every way possible, through all of the diversity of experience and background and expertise that can be brought to bear on the challenges and opportunities. 10 months out from the first caucus, from the first votes that are going to be cast, it would be presumptuous of me to declare or define who our running mate would be. But I will tell you this. I will do everything in my power to get to the question, the answer to the question that you just asked, to make sure that our administration and our ticket looks like the country. And this, además, and I hope you all are with me on this. Whoever the nominee is in summer of 2020, whoever she or he may be, we will do everything in our power to make them successful in defeating Donald Trump and then bringing this country together in January of 2021. Thank you. Appreciate it.
So, by the cameras, where the cameras are set up.
¿Qué tal, Beto? Gracias por venir a San Diego.
Gracias por estar aquí.
Mi nombre es Ricardo, soy veterano de la Naval, 20 años. I thank you for what you are doing and bringing so much attention to things that are really direly needed to be talked about, like our families being detained at the border, things like that. My question, though, is about the ERA, which you just touched on, and it's something to me very important. My best friends right here, Amy, and obviously, you know, I support a lot of women in my life, right? I have 5 sisters. My mom is my pillar, and today, for the first time, Congress took up a hearing on the ERA after 36 years. We have 37 states who have passed it. We need one more. Arizona, just a couple of weeks ago, they denied it. The next one up is Louisiana. What are you going to do? Hopefully, even this doesn't have to come to when the election arrives, but from now until election, to make sure that the ERA passes and to make sure that women are recognized as full citizens by our Constitution. And thank you again.
Thank you, Ricardo. That was great. And Amy, thank you for being here. So, from the economic dynamic, the 80 cents on the dollar, the 63 cents, the 51 cents on the dollar, you can make the argument that we need it from the way that we treat people in our communities, women in our communities. The degradation of the Violence Against Women Act, the ways in which that has been contested, the way that we do not allow asylum applications any longer in this country based on assault or domestic violence, all under this administration. It would be great if there was absolute clarity and no question about it because it was enshrined in our Constitution. I just watched an interview with Ruth Bader Ginsburg on this issue. And she, like you, was talking about the women in her life, the girls in her life, and she said, I would love to be able to pull out my pocket Constitution and show my grandchildren that there is no doubt about this, that they're guaranteed to be treated equally in this country. So you ask, what can we do about this? It is not enough for us to be right on this issue, or right as we see it. It is important for the next president to campaign on the ground, having town hall meetings like these, not assuming anything about anybody, right? And not writing anybody off, making the case and listening to people about legitimate concerns or questions that they have about this. We cannot dictate this. We cannot do it by executive order. This is not going to be an act of Congress. All that has already happened. We now need the people in the various states of this country to do their part and ratify it so we get it over the line and into the Constitution. You have my commitment to do that, to be on the ground and to campaign for this, to make sure that we win this. So thank you. Thanks for asking, Ricardo. Great question.
In front of the stage, on top of the stage, right back here. Here we go, right here.
Hi, my name is Raven Armelin, and I live here in San Diego. I'm a California native, and you have a lot on your plate from what you've just talked about. And I know we can support you in many ways, and that's really important. But I'd like to take a look at the things that we can do ourselves to free you up to do the things that are really important. One of them is just one word that I can think of, and there are probably better ways, but to deal with women's issues in and around being taken advantage of by men. I think something like maybe Lorena Bobbitt. Anytime you get in a situation that seems out of hand and you can just let go of it and free yourself for other duties. And that's all I have to say about that.
I got to tell you, Raven, I didn't see that coming, and I don't know that there's much that I should add to that, but thank you for your comments. Yeah, thank you for your comments. Appreciate it. Yes.
Okay, I am behind you by the doors. Over here, Beto, I'm raising. There we go.
Good morning, Mr. O'Rourke. Thank you for coming to San Diego to hold this town hall. It's the first one I've ever been to, and we San Diegans really appreciate it. You recently unveiled your platform on tackling environmental policy in the United States. Do you think the U.S. should get involved in environmental issues on an international scale, and if so, how?
Thank you for being here and for making this the first town hall that you've attended and for asking a question at it. Takes a lot of courage. The short answer is yes, and as you probably know, we're actually the one country on the face of the planet today that has exempted itself from its international commitments to combating climate change before it is too late. I believe there are 194 or 193 signatories. Every other country could find a way to muster the political will to sign, and we're the one country under this administration that has tried to take itself out of the agreement. Having said that, the first day of our administration, not only must we sign back up to Paris, not only must we vigorously pursue our commitments at Kigali, which are for these incredibly potent greenhouse gases like hydrofluorocarbons that are many thousands of times worse than CO2. We're going to have to convene these powers to do even more, because the commitments that we have in Paris right now, though it's a great step in the right direction, it's insufficient for us to get there. We've got to be able to lead by example, so I think all this starts at home. But if we're going to have to ask China, which has 3 to 4 times the coal-fired plants that the United States has, we're going to have to ask India, we're going to have to ask Africa, as many of these countries continue to come online and want to consume at the rates that we're consuming, there's going to have to be some leadership here in this country. And so that ambitious program that we announced yesterday, $5 trillion in investment over the next 10 years, ensuring that all of our public lands are no longer leased for oil and gas exploration, that everything that we purchase as a federal government reflects the cost of carbon and pollution, and use the extraordinary procurement power of the federal government to bring about this change. We've got to do all of that, and then simultaneously to your question, we've got to ask the rest of the world to do their part as well. So yes, that has to happen. We have to go much further than we've been before. So thank you for the question. Yeah.
Thanks for being here. My name is Jerry Miller. I've worked for 36 years as a pharmacist and healthcare consultant. And I appreciate what you're talking about with healthcare for everybody. I think we need to look at how we're providing healthcare in general. The more times you go to see a physician, the more money the physician makes. We have very perverse incentives for providing healthcare. We're not focused on prevention. We're focused on how many times can we get the patient into the hospital? How many times can they come back and have lab tests drawn? All of those types of things. I'd like to see us take a look at accountable care organizations and other types of setups for healthcare where we're focused on keeping patients healthy rather than keeping them sick so we can line our pocketbooks by treating them.
That's powerful. Thank you for saying that. And all this stuff, and I know everybody knows this, but to state the obvious, is connected. We just saw a report that 47% of Americans live in a community where the air is not safe to breathe. That's almost half of us. We cannot count the number of water systems where it is unsafe to drink the water, not just in Flint, not just in Denmark, South Carolina, where I was not too long ago, where it's going to take $15 million to rebuild their water infrastructure, money they do not have. Not just in the 50 water systems in Texas where you cannot drink the water, but we were just in the Central Valley. And the irony is that those farm workers who help to produce the food that sustains this country are breathing some of the dirtiest air. In many cases do not have access to potable water and are bearing the brunt of current farming and food production processes. When you add to that so many of our fellow Americans live in food deserts where you cannot get a healthy meal, where you might have to take a 2-hour round-trip bus ride to buy vegetables and fruits, we also have one of the inputs to a healthcare crisis in this country. So the way that we produce food, the way that we have access to food, our built environment, replacing some of these cars on the road with mass transit systems, building to a human scale in our subdivision code so that we have less pollution in the air and more people are safe to walk outside. If we do all of that and then we provide incentives to healthcare providers, whether it's pharmacists or nurse practitioners or doctors, to focus on the overall health of their fellow human beings instead of the profit incentive that underlies so much of modern medicine today, then when we couple that with a guaranteed, high-quality, universal healthcare plan for America, where every single one of us can be well enough to live to our full potential, I guarantee there's no stopping this country going forward. So thank you for reminding us about how all this is connected. Thank you.
Okay, we're back by the doors, the open doors. Here we go. And I'm so sorry there's so many hands up. I'm only going to be able to do a few more. I promise I'll try my best.
Hi, I'm Milton Broa, and I'm from Rancho San Diego, and a lifetime Republican. What would you tell the disillusioned Republicans, which is including myself, to be able to throw the support towards your way?
Thank you for being here. So, I served 6 years in the El Paso City Council, neither a Republican or a Democrat. I was just in El Paso, a nonpartisan position. Balance the budget, make sure that police and fire are paid commensurate with their value, invest in the capital of our wastewater and drinking water systems. Speaking of water, listen to my constituents. Every single week held a town hall meeting, and I never asked, no me importa, if you're Republican or Democrat, just you're an El Pasoan, I represent you, I'm accountable to you, I serve you, so I'm gonna answer your questions. In Congress, 6 years, in the minority, we were able to get legislation passed to expand mental health care access for veterans, to protect public lands in El Paso, Texas, in a state that isn't known for federal protection of public lands. We were able to invest in our ports of entry, across which 20% of U.S.-Mexico trade comes in or goes out of this country, just like you have here in San Diego. 32 million lawful, legal crossings between Ciudad Juarez and El Paso, not too far behind what you see between Tijuana and San Diego. Did that all with Republican partners. We would find the common ground to pursue the common cause, would not allow party affiliation to stand in our way. And then this Senate campaign that so many of you, including Kari, helped us out with in Texas. We went everywhere. We went to King County, which I think voted for Donald Trump like 95, 96% in 2016. But every bit as deserving of being heard, of being listened to, of being fought for. And though we didn't win the race, we were 2.6% down. We got more votes than any Democrat in the history of the state of Texas. Young voter turnout, up 500%. And a state that had been 50th in voter turnout in the United States of America now has a seat at the table, including our 38 electoral college votes. 500,000 of my fellow Texans voted for Greg Abbott, a very conservative Republican Tea Party governor, and voted for me on the same ballot. And we never had to trim our sails, always showed up with the courage of our conviction, but we never wrote anybody off, and we never took anyone for granted. And the kicker, my mom, a lifelong Republican, voted for me in the 2018 election as well. So if I can win her over, I hope to win you over as well. Thank you.
Okay, we're still over here by the doors.
Got you.
And I'm really sorry. These are going to be my last 3 questions right here.
Hi, Beto. I'm 15 and I live by the Otay Ranch area. I've always been concerned about is our schools the best it can be? And one thing I don't hear politicians talk about is the educational system in the U.S. and how, as a country with the #1 economy ranked number 29, I want to know, what are your plans to make the U.S. the #1 for the educational system?
Right on. Thank you for being here. And thanks for asking the question. So, first and foremost, I mentioned our 3 kids. They're all in world-class public schools back in El Paso. Mesita Elementary, the same world-class public school that I went to. When my parents were in elementary school, if you were to speak Spanish in the hallways, you would be disciplined. If you kept it up, you'd be suspended or expelled. When I was going to Mesita, there was a 45-minute Spanish class every day that you were in school. My kids are learning math today in Spanish. Tomorrow, that math class will be taught in English. It's a true dual language school, making the most of a binational community, and innovation brought by public school educators, making our community even more competitive. And so investing in those educators, in the state of Texas, nearly half of them are working a second or a third job. I was just in South Carolina. Fully 1/4 of public school educators leave the profession in the first year. Half of them by the 5th year. And so you think about all of our costs, our investment in those public school educators, in their K through 12 education, in federally financed student loans. They just aren't able to make it. Why? It's just really simple. We're not paying them enough. And when they too have taken out loans, 30, 40, 50, 60,000 bucks on their back, and they're not making enough to put food on the table, pay the note on the mortgage, and pay that loan back, they gotta go do something that makes more money. And ultimately, we all lose out when those teachers can no longer make ends meet. So paying public school educators what they are worth, starting education universally, not in kindergarten when you're 4 or 5 years old, but pre-kindergarten when you're 3 or 4 years old. So every kid is at the same starting line with the same chances in life. Acknowledging equity challenges that we have in public school education. We know that in that kindergarten classroom, a child of color is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled. The jailhouse from schoolhouse pipeline, I used to think that started in high school. It starts when the kid is 4 years old, absolutely defenseless against the structural racism that we have in our country right now. We've got to acknowledge that. And we've got to hire teachers who look like their students. And we've got to make sure that once you graduate from high school, that you're both college ready and career ready. College ready to go for free to any community college in this country, and then debt free to public serving 4-year institutions, and then career ready if you want to join a union, enter an apprenticeship, to learn a trade or skill without taking on a dime of debt, to work one of these high-tech, high-wage jobs that we're creating right now but that we cannot fill. I want to make sure that you're prepared out of that high school senior classroom to do just that. All this requires an investment. It will not come cheap. But if we look at it as something that will pay dividends and a return far and above the initial cost, then I think we are together, Republican and Democrat, willing to do that and make sure that public education is excellent in this country. Thank you for asking the question.
Hey, here we go.
Good morning. Thanks for being here in San Diego, and we appreciate that. My question is homeless folks, veterans, single moms with children, elderly. It's a big problem in the USA. No one should be without a home. There's 10,000 folks here, 60,000 in LA. So my question is, how are we going to take care of this?
Thank you so much. I tell you, I'm first of all grateful that you asked a question on behalf of people who may not be here right now, may not have been able to come here, may consequently not have a voice in their democracy. And so you are their voice right now. I try to go, when we were trying to figure out how the VA was doing in El Paso, we were hearing from veterans that they couldn't get in to see a mental health care provider, year-long plus waits, and care delayed became care denied, and it leads to some of these tragic outcomes that we've seen. We would go directly to veterans. We'd hold meetings like these and listen to veterans about what was happening at the VA, and the solutions came out of conversations like these. To that same effect, visiting with homeless members of our communities, I have learned so much about where the problem originates and how we can solve it. We were visiting a homeless woman in Houston, Texas, living under a bridge. Asked her how she became homeless. She had reported her husband, who was beating her, from whom she feared she might be killed. Did everything she was supposed to do. He was in fact arrested, is doing time, but was the principal breadwinner in their family. She could no longer afford the mortgage, was out on the streets, and has to be out on the streets 12 months before she can apply for services. She's just waiting out the clock until she gets to past a year. She talked about substance abuse challenges that she sees amongst fellow homeless, and I wrongly assumed that that's what made them homeless. She said no, they were homeless. They don't have access to health care, cannot go to a pharmacist or a prescriber or a doctor, and the only way to treat their conditions and their symptoms is to buy drugs off the street. And that's exactly what they're doing. We were in another part of Texas and met a young man named Magic, and homeless. And I said, is it tough to get a job? Why aren't you earning the income that allows you to afford a house? And he said, yeah, it's tough to get a job when you can't take a shower, when you can't wash up, when you have one set of clothes, when you can't go in for a job interview. So I've learned that it's not that you need a job, then you can afford the home, or you need a job, then you can afford medication. It is that if you do not have a home or a roof over your head, if you cannot see a doctor and be well enough, then there's a more likely chance that you're gonna be homeless in the first place. So starting with that roof, that home, that hogar, starting with healthcare for everybody without exception, including mental health care, is so fundamental to being able to get this done. And in California, perhaps especially, where housing crises are going through the roof, so to speak. We've got to make sure that we are creating enough housing units for the demand that is here. And listen, that involves some tough choices on your part. It means inclusionary zoning, so that poor people are going to have to live next to rich people, and we're just going to have to get over it and make sure that that happens. All across this country, doesn't matter what state I go to, we are meeting the working poor who are driving 2 or 3 hours to go to a job to serve wealthy people, and then driving 2 or 3 hours back. They need to be able to live near where they work. Local communities have to make sure that zoning allows for that. The federal government, through the HUD-VASH program for veterans, and then also through the Section 8 program that makes the most of the private market, needs to invest and expand those programs so there are more apartments, more housing units, more single-family homes that people can buy. And then last thing, and everything connects, right? There is 10 times the wealth in white America there is in black America today. It is not an accident. It is by design. If you follow the history of slavery and segregation and Jim Crow and redlining, and the inability of so much of black America to build wealth through their homes in the first place. When I started a small business in El Paso, Texas in 1999 with some good friends, my dad was able to take out a personal loan. Couldn't get a loan from the bank. He borrowed against the house. That gave me the seed capital to start a business that hired other people. We've essentially precluded a big part of America from being able to do that. So the structural economic barriers to being able to access homes and wealth and pass that on to the next generation, that has to be part of the conversation as well. So all of this is connected. Thank you for asking the question.
Okay, this is going to be our last question. Hi, Beto. My name is Gina. This is my daughter, Luisa. We're from El Paso. We moved here 2 years ago. So we've been your supporter forever. I guess you've been here talking and telling us what you can do for our country when you get elected, because I really hope and I believe you will be. I guess our question is, how can we get you in the White House? How can we get the young voters involved? Because I know it's a school day and a lot of younger crowds are in school right now and at work, but what can we do for you to get you there?
Thanks for the question. All I know is that the campaigns that we've run, when I was running for city council in El Paso, Texas, it's always been door-to-door, eyeball-to-eyeball connection and communication. It is it's enticing to be able to look at a screen or to think that you can just email this in or post something on Facebook and that it's going to connect and allow you to win the votes of your fellow Americans. Nothing beats engaging with one another, maybe especially now at a time of such division in this country, at a time where we always have a device in front of our face. It is so almost transgressive to have somebody knock on your door, a human being, having an unscripted, real, sometimes awkward conversation, right? And I know that it works. We ran against the odds, and you'll remember this, and against the incumbent. In 2012, we were outspent, I think, 5-1. I knocked on 16,000 doors myself. Friends and family members knocked on tens of thousands more. I knew this strategy was working. We were about a month out from the election. And it's a Monday morning, and I'm going into a diner, and this guy pulls me aside. He says, "Are you Beto?" And I said, "I am." And he said, "Last Thursday, you knocked on my grandmother's door, and she invited you in, and she told you about her grandson who's in the Marines that she's very proud of, her daughter who's a school teacher that she's very proud of. You just listened, you took it in, you guys had a nice conversation, and then you kept going on." Well, Sunday, after you visited her home on Thursday, I and 31 of my fellow cousins were at her home having menudo, and she made each of us promise to vote for you. So, Beto, I don't know who you are, but we're voting for you. Do not mess this up. So if you are willing to be part of the largest grassroots campaign in this country's history, if you're willing to knock on people's doors, not always easy, but I'll tell you what, it is absolutely thrilling. It is the fundamental essence of our democracy. We would love to have your help. You can go to BetoO'Rourke.com, sign up there. Know that we don't take any money from any political action committees, no corporations, no special interests, all human beings, all people like you, like me, coming together to do something for our country. Lastly, and your question offers us an excellent way in which to close. You're from El Paso, you're now here in San Diego. I'm from El Paso, I'm now here in San Diego. Our new AAA baseball team, the El Paso Chihuahuas, is a farm team of the San Diego Padres. So we are connected through baseball. The Chihuahuas are on a 10-game winning streak right now. So when I go home this week, I'm hoping that I get to catch a Chihuahuas game. We'll be thinking about you all. We'll never forget this moment, your support, your kindness to us, these great questions. Thank you for having us out, San Diego. Les agradezco y nos vemos la próxima vez. Gracias. Thank you very much.